Chapter 21 Preparation for War. The noise of the explosions stopped within an hour of the first. It wasn't much later that Shiva, Parvateshwar, Sati, Nandi, and Veerbhadra, accompanied by a brigade of 1,500 cavalry, were on their way to Mount Mandar. Brihaspati's scientists rode with the brigade, sick with worry about their leader's fate. They rode hard and hoped to cover the day-long distance to the mountain in fewer than 8 hours. It was almost at the end of the second prahar, with the sun directly overhead, that the brigade turned the last corner of the road, where the forest cover cleared, to give them their first glimpse of the mountain. An angry roar rent the air as the soldiers sighted what admittedly had been the heart of their emperor. Mandar had been ruthlessly destroyed. The mountain had a colossal crater at its center. It was almost as if a giant asura had struck his massive hands right through the core of the mountain and scooped it out. The enormous buildings of science were in ruins, their remnants scattered across the plain below. The giant churners at the bottom of the mountain were still functioning, their eerie sound making the gruesome picture even more macabre. Brihaspati, roared Shiva as he rode hard right into the heart of the mountain, where miraculously the pathway still stood strong. "Wait, Shiva," called out Parvateshwar. "It could be a trap." Shiva, unmindful of any danger, continued to glope up the pathway through the devastated heart of the mountain. The brigade, with Parvateshwar and Sati in the lead, rode fast, trying to keep up with their Nilkant. They reached the top to be horrified by what they saw. Parts of the buildings hung limply on broken foundations, some structures still smoldering, scorched, and unrecognizable body parts ripped apart by the repeated explosions were strewn all over. It was impossible to even identify the dead. Shiva tumbled off his horse, his face devoid of even a ray of hope. Nobody could have survived such a lethal attack. "Brihaspati, how did the terrorists get their hands on the Devi Asuras?" asked an agitated Parvateshwar, the fire of vengeance blazing within him. The soldiers had been ordered to collect all the body parts and cremate them in separate pyres to help the departed on their onward journey. A manifest was being drawn up of the names of those believed dead. The first name on the list was that of Brihaspati, chief scientist of Meluha, Sarayupari Brahmin, swan-chosen tribe. The other were mostly Arishtanemi, assigned to the task of protecting Mandar. It was a small consolation that the casualties were minimal, since most of the mountain's residents were in Devagiri for the Nilkant's marriage. The list was going to be sent to the great sannyasis in Kashmir, whose powers over the spiritual force were considered second to none. If the sannyasis could be cajoled into reciting prayers for these departed souls, then it could be hoped that their grisly death in the birth would not mar their subsequent births. "It could have also been the Somras journal," said Panini, one of the Brihaspati's assistant chief scientists, offering another plausible explanation. Shiva looked up suddenly on hearing Panini's words. "The Somras did this? How?" asked a disbelieving Sati. The Somras is very unstable during its manufacturing process, continued Panini. It is kept stable by using copious quantities of the Saraswati waters. One of the main projects was to determine whether we could stabilize the Somras while using less water, much lesser than at present. Shiva remembered Brahaspati talking about this. He leaned over to listen intently to Panini. It was one of the dream projects of Panini found it hard to complete the statement. The thought that Brahaspati, the greatest scientist of his generation, the father figure to all the learned men at Mount Mandar was gone, was too much for Panini to bear. He was choked by the intense pain he felt inside. He stopped talking, shut his eyes, and hoped the terrible moment would pass. Regaining a semblance of control over himself, he continued. It was one of Brahaspatiji's dream projects. He had come back to organize the experiment that was to begin today. He didn't want us to miss the last day of the celebrations, so he came alone. Parvateshwar was numb. You mean this could have been an accident? Yes, replied Panini. We were all aware that the experiment was risky. Maybe that is why Brahaspatiji decided to begin without us. The entire room was stunned into silence by this unexpected information. Panini retreated into his private hell. Parvateshwar continued to gaze into the distance, shocked by the turn of events. Sati stared at Shiva, holding his hand, deeply worried about how her husband was taking the death of his friend, and that it may all have been just a senseless mishap. It was late into the first hour of the fourth prahar. It had been decided that the brigade would set up camp at the base of the ruined mountain. They would leave the following day after all the ceremonies for the departed had been completed. 2 riders had been dispatched to Devagiri with the news about Mandar. Parvateshwar and Sati sat at the edge of the mountain peak, whispering to each other. The drone of Brahmin scientists reciting Sanskrit shloks at the base of the mountain floated up to create an ethereal atmosphere of pathos. Nandi and Veerbhadra stood at attention, a polite distance from Parvateshwar and Sati, looking at their lord. Shiva was walking around the ruins of the Mandar buildings, lost in thought. It was tearing him apart that he had not seen any recognizable part of Brahaspati. Everybody in Mandar had been mutilated beyond recognition. He desperately searched for some sign of his friend, something he could keep with himself, something he could cling on to, which would soothe his tortured soul in the year of mourning that he would go through. He walked at a snail's pace, his eyes combing the ground. They suddenly fell upon an object he recognized only too well. He slowly bent down to pick it up. It was a bracelet made of leather, burnt at the edges, its back hold destroyed. The heart of the fury explosion had scorched its brown color to black at most places. The center, however, with an embroidered design, was astonishingly unblemished. Shiva brought it close to his eyes. The crimson hue of the setting sun caused the Om symbol to glow. At the amalgam of the top and bottom curve of the Om were 2 serpent heads. The third curve, surging out to the east, ended in a sharp serpent head with its worked tongue striking out threateningly. It was him. He killed Brahaspati. Shiva swung around, eyes desperately scanning the limbs scattered about, hoping to find the owner of the bracelet or some part of him. But there was nothing. Shiva screamed silently, a scream audible only to him and Brihaspati's wounded soul. He clutched the bracelet in his fist till its still burning embers burned into his palms. Clasping it even more firmly, he swore a terrible vengeance he vowed to bring upon the Naga, a death that would scar him for his next 7 births. That Naga and his entire army of vice would be annihilated, piece by bloody piece. Shiva, Shiva! The insistent call yanked him back to reality. Sati was standing in front of him, gently touching his hand. Parvateshwar stood next to him, disturbed. Nandi and Veerbhadra stood to the other side. "Let it go, Shiva," said Sati. Shiva continued to stare at her, blank. "Let it go, Shiva," repeated Sati softly. "It's singeing your hand." Shiva opened his palm. Nandi immediately lunged forward to pull the bracelet out. Screaming in surprised agony, Nandi dropped the bracelet as it scalded his hand. How did the Lord hold it for so long? Shiva immediately bent down and picked up the bracelet, this time carefully. His fingers were holding the less charred edge, the part with the Om symbol. He turned to Parvateshwar. "It was not an accident." "What?" cried a startled Parvateshwar. "Are you sure?" asked Sati. Shiva looked towards Sati and raised the bracelet, the serpent Om clearly coming into view. Sati let out a gasp of shock. Parvateshwar, Nandi and Veerbhadra immediately closed in to stare intently at the bracelet. "Naga," whispered Nandi. "The same bastard who attacked Sati in Meru," growled Shiva. "The same Naga who attacked us on our return from Mandar. The very bloody same son of a bitch." "He will pay for this, Shiva," said Veerbhadra. Turning towards Parvateshwar, Shiva said, "We ride to Devagiri tonight. We declare war." Parvateshwar nodded. The Meluhan War Council sat quietly, observing 5 minutes of silence in honor of the martyrs of Mandar. General Parvateshwar and his 25 brigadiers sat to the right of Emperor Daksha. To Daksha's left sat the Nilkant, the administrative Brahmins, led by Prime Minister Kanakala and the governors of the 15 provinces. "The decision of the council is a given," said Daksha, beginning the proceedings. "The question is, when do we attack? It will take us at the most a month to be ready to march, Your Highness," said Parvateshwar. "You know that there are no roads between Meluha and Swadeep. Our army would have to travel through dense, impenetrable forests. So even if we begin the march in a month, we will not be in Swadeep before 3 months from today. So time is of the essence." "Then let the preparations begin, Your Highness," said Kanakala, adding a Brahmin voice of reason to the battle cry of the Kshatriyas. "May I suggest an alternative?" "An alternative?" asked a surprised Daksha. "Please don't misunderstand me," said Kanakala. "I understand the rage of the entire nation about what happened at Mandar, but we want vengeance against the perpetrators of the crime, not all of Swadeep. Could we try and see whether a scalpel might work before we bring out the mighty war sword?" "The path you suggest is one of cowardice, Kanakala," said Parvateshwar. "No, Parvateshwar, my aim is to seek our vengeance at minimum cost to Meluhan lives," said Kanakala politely. "After all, discretion is the better part of valor. My soldiers are resolute and will defend Meluha to the death, Madam Prime Minister." "I know they will," said Kanakala, maintaining her composure. and I know that you too are willing to shed your blood for Meluha. My suggestion is that we send an emissary to Emperor Dilipa and request him to surrender the terrorist who perpetrated this attack. We can threaten that if he doesn't cooperate, we will attack with all the might at our disposal. His eyes scowling with impatience, Parvateshwar said, "Request him? And why would he listen? For decades, the Swadweepans have got away with their nefarious activities because they think we don't have the stomach for a fight. And if we talk about him scalpel approach after an outrage like Mount Mandar, they will be convinced that they can mount any attack at will and we will not respond." "I disagree, Parvateshwar," said Kanakala. "They have mounted terrorist attacks because they are scared that they cannot take us on in a direct fight. They are afraid that they cannot withstand our superior technology and war machines. I am only thinking about what Lord Shiva had said when he had first come here. Can we try talking to them before we fight? This may be an opportunity to get them to admit that there are sections in their society who are terrorists. If they hand them over, we may even find way of coexisting." "I don't think Shiva thinks like that anymore," said Parvateshwar, pointing towards the Neelkantha. "He too wants vengeance." Shiva sat silently, his face expressionless. Only his eyes glowed with the terrible anger seething within. "My lord," said Kanakala, looking towards Shiva, her hands folded in a namaste. "I hope that at least you understand what I'm trying to say. Even Brihaspati would have wanted us to avoid violence if possible." The last sentence had an effect on Shiva similar to a torrential downpour on a raging fire. He turned towards Kanakala and gazed into her eyes before turning towards Daksha. "Your Highness, what Kanakala says is right. Perhaps we can send an emissary to Swadweep to give them an opportunity to atone for their sins. Striving for a peaceful resolution will help in avoiding the deaths of innocents. However, I would still suggest that we begin war preparations. We should be prepared for the possibilities that the Chandravanshis may reject our offer." "The Mahadev has spoken," said Daksha. "I propose that this be the decision of the War Council. All in favor, raise your hands." Every hand in the room was raised. The die had been cast. There would be an attempt at peace. If that didn't work, the Meluhan would attack. "I have failed again, Bhadra," cried Shiva. "I can't protect anyone in need." Shiva was sitting next to Veerbhadra in a private section of his palace courtyard. A deeply worried Sati had invited Veerbhadra to try and pull Shiva out of his mourning. Shiva had retreated into a shell, not speaking, not crying. She hoped her husband's childhood friend would succeed where she had failed. "How can you blame yourself, Shiva?" asked Veerbhadra, handing over the chilam to his friend. "How can this be your fault?" Shiva picked up the chilam and took a deep drag. The marijuana coursed through his body but did not help. The pain was too intense. Shiva snorted in disgust and threw the chilam away. As tears flooded his eyes, he looked up at the sky and swore, "I will avenge you, my brother, even if it is the last thing I do, even if I have to spend every moment of the rest of my life doing so, even if I have to come back to this world again and again. I will avenge you." Veerbhadra turned towards Sati sitting in the distance, a worried look on his face. Sati got up and walked towards them. She came up to Shiva and held him tight, resting his tired head against her bosom. hoping to soothe Shiva's tortured soul. To Sati's surprise, Shiva did not raise his arm to wrap them around her. He just sat motionless, breathing intermittently. My lord, cried a surprised Varaga as he stood to attention. Respectfully, so did the 24 other brigadiers, for the Nilkant had just been announced into the war room. Parvateshwar rose slowly. He spoke kindly as he knew the pain Shiva still carried about Brihaspati's grisly death. How are you, Shiva? I'm all right, thank you. We are discussing battle plans. I know, said Shiva. I was wondering if I could join in. Of course, said Parvateshwar as he moved his chair to the side. The essential problem for us, said Parvateshwar, trying to quickly bring Shiva up to speed, is the transport links between Meluha and Swadeep. There aren't any, right? Right, answered Parvateshwar. After their last defeat at our hands 100 years ago, the Chandravanshis destroyed the entire infrastructure that then existed between Meluha and Swadeep. They depopulated their border cities and moved them deeper into their empire. Forest grew where cities and roads once were. There is no river that flows from our territory into theirs. Basically, there is no way our huge technological superior war machines can be transported to the borders of Swadeep. That was their intention, obviously, said Shiva. Your superiority is technology. Their superiority is their numbers. They have negated your strength. Exactly, and if our war machines are taken out of the equation, our 100,000 strong army may get inundated by their million soldiers. They have a million strong army? Asked Shiva, incredulous. Yes, my lord, said Varaga. We can't be absolutely sure, but that is our estimate. However, we also estimate that the regulars in their army would not be more than 100,000. The rest would be part-timers, essentially people such as small traders, artisans, farmers, and anyone without influence. They would be forcibly conscripted and used as cannon fodder. Disgusting, said Parvateshwar, risking the lives of Shudras and Vaishyas for a job that should be done by Kshatriyas. Their Kshatriyas have no honor. Shiva looked towards Parvateshwar and nodded. Can't we dismantle our war machines, carry them to Swadeep and reassemble them? Yes, we can, said Parvateshwar, but that is technically possible only for a few. Our most devastating machines, which would give us the edge, like the long-range catapult, cannot be assembled outside a factory. The long-range catapult? Yes, answered Parvateshwar. It can hurl huge boulders and smoldering barrels over distance of more than a kilometer. If used efficiently, they can soften, even devastate the enemy lines before our cavalry and infantry begin their charge. Basically, the role that elephants used to play earlier. Then why not use elephants? They are unpredictable. No matter how effectively you train them, an army often loses control over them in the heat of the battle. In fact, in the previous war with the Swadipans, it was their own elephants who brought about their downfall. Really? Asked Shiva. Yes, answered Parvateshwar. Our ploy of firing at the Muhats and generating tremendous noise with our war drums worked. The Chandravanshi elephants panicked and ran into their own army, shattering their lines, especially the ones composed of irregulars. All we had to do then was charge in and finish the job. No elephants then. Absolutely, said Parvateshwar. So we need something that we can carry along with us and which can be used to soften their irregular in order to negate their numerical superiority. Parvateshwar nodded. Shiva looked down the window where a stiff morning breeze was making the leaves flutter. The leaves were green. Shiva stared hardly. They remained green. I know, said Shiva, looking at Parvateshwar, suddenly his face luminescent. Why don't we use arrows? Arrows? Asked a surprised Parvateshwar. Archery was the battle art of the most elite Kshatriyas used for one-on-one duels. However, since one-on-one duels could only be fought between warriors of equal chosen tribes, this skill was reduced to being a demonstration art for the creme de la creme. Archers earned huge respect for their rare skill, but they were not decisive in battles. There had been a time when bows and arrows were crucial in war strategies as weapons of mass destruction. That was the time of the Daiviya Astras. Many of these Astras were usually released through arrows. However, with the ban on Daiviya Astra many thousands of years ago by Lord Rudra, the effectiveness of archery units in large-scale battles had reduced drastically. How can that reduce their numerical superiority, my lord? Asked Varaka. Even the most skilled among the archers will take at least 5 seconds to aim, fire and execute a kill. He will not be able to kill more than 12 a minute. We have only 100 Kshatriyas who are of the gold order of archers. The rest can shoot, but their aim cannot be relied upon. So we will not be able to kill more than 1,200 of our enemies per minute. Certainly not enough against the Chandravanshis. I'm not talking about using arrows for one-on-one shooting, said Shiva. I'm talking about using them for softening the enemy as weapons of mass destruction. Disregarding the confused expressions of his audience, Shiva continued, let me explain. Suppose we create a corps of archers of the lower Kshatriya chosen tribes. But their aim wouldn't be good, said Varaka. That doesn't matter. Let us say we have at least 5,000 such archers. Suppose we train them to just get the range right. Forget about the aim. Suppose their job is to just keep firing arrows in the general direction of the Chandravanshi army. If they don't have to aim, they can fire a lot more quickly, maybe one arrow every 2 or 3 seconds. Parvateshwar narrowed his eyes as the brilliance of the idea struck him. The rest of his brigadiers were still trying to gather their thoughts. Think about it, said Shiva. We would have 5,000 arrows raining down on the Chandravanshis every 2 seconds. Suppose we can keep this up for 10 minutes, an almost continuous shower of arrows. Their irregulars would break. The arrow would have the same effect as that of the elephants in the last war. Brilliant, cried Varaka. Perhaps, mused Parvateshwar, our archers could be trained to release the arrows lying on their backs while holding up the bow with their feet. No doubt, accuracy would be somewhat compromised, but the effect would be far more deadly. Excellent, exclaimed Shiva, because then the bows can be bigger and the range longer, and the arrows bigger and thicker, almost like small spears. Continued Parvateshwar, strong enough to even penetrate leather and thick wooden shields. Only the soldiers with metal shields like the regulars would be safe from this. Do we have our answer? Asked Shiva. Yes, we do, answered Parvateshwar with a smile. He turned towards Varaka. Create this corps. I want 5,000 men ready within 2 weeks. It will be done, my lord, said Varaka. What do you want to talk about, Shiva? Asked Parvateshwar as he entered the Mythology factory. He was accompanied by Varaka and Prasanjit, just as Shiva had requested. Varaka had reluctantly left the archery corps he had been trained over the past week. However, he had been motivated to attend in expectation of another brilliant idea from the Nilkant. He was not disappointed. I was thinking, said Shiva, we would still need an equivalent of your stabbing ram to break their center. The center is where I assume their journal would place their regulars. As long as they hold, our victory cannot be guaranteed. Right, said Parvateshwar, and we have to assume that these soldiers would be disciplined enough to stay in formation despite the barrage of arrows. Exactly, said Shiva. We cannot transport the ram, right? No, we can't, my lord, said Varaga. How about if we try to create a human ram? Go ahead, said Parvateshwar slowly, listening intently. Say we align the soldiers into a square of 20 men by 20 men, said Shiva. We can have each one of them use his shield to cover the left half of his own body and the right half of the soldier to the left of him. That will allow them to push their spear through from in between the shields, said Parvateshwar. Exactly, said Shiva, and the soldiers behind can use their shields as a lid to cover themselves as well as the soldier in front. This formation would be like a tortoise with the shield holding against any attack, much like a tortoise shell. The enemy will not be able to break through, but our spears will cut into them. We could have the strongest and most experienced soldiers in the front to make sure that the tortoise is well led, said Prasanjit. No, said Parvateshwar. Position the most experienced at the back and at the sides to make sure that the square doesn't break in case the younger soldiers panic. This entire formation works only if the team stays together. Right, said Shiva, smiling at Parvateshwar's quick insight. And what if instead of the usual spears, they carried this? Shiva raised a weapon that he had designed and the army Mythology team had quickly assembled. Parvateshwar marveled at the simple brilliance of it. It had the body of a spear, but its head had been broadened. Onto the broadened head, two more spikes had been added to the left and right of the main spear spike. Assaulting an enemy with this weapon would be like striking him with three spears at the same time. Absolutely brilliant, Shiva, marveled Parvateshwar. What do you call it? I call it a Trishul. Prasanjit, said Parvateshwar, you are in charge of creating this corpse. I want at least 5 tortoise formations ready by the time we march. I will assign 2,000 men to you for this. It will be done, my lord, said Prasanjit with a military salute. Parvateshwar gazed at Shiva with respect. He knew that Shiva's ideas were brilliant, and the fact that he had come up with these tactics despite his profound personal grief was worthy of admiration. Maybe what the others say about Shiva could be true. Maybe he is the man who will finish Lord Ram's task. Parvateshwar hoped that Shiva would not prove him wrong. Shiva sat in the royal meeting room with Daksha and Parvateshwar at his side. Two legendary Arishtanemi brigadiers, Vidyumali and Maya Shrenik, sat at a distance. A muscular and once proud man stood in front of Shiva, pleading with folded hands. Give me a chance, my lord, said Drapaku. If the law has been changed, then why can't we fight? Drapaku was the man whose blind father had blessed Shiva in Kotdwar. He had been a brigadier in the Meluha army before the disease, which blinded his father, had also killed his wife and unborn child. He had been declared a Vikrama along with his father. But Shiva refused to be rushed. Tell me, Drapaku, how is your father? He is well, my lord, and he will disown me if I don't support you in this Dharmayudh. Shiva smiled softly. He too believed this was a dharam yudh, a holy war. But Dripaku, who will take care of him if something were to happen to you? Meluha will take care of him, my lord, but he would die 1,000 deaths if I didn't go to battle with you. What kind of a son would I be if I didn't fight for my father's honor, for my country's honor? Shiva still seemed a little unsure. He could sense the discomfort of the other in the room. It had not escaped his notice that despite the repeal of the Vikrama law, nobody had touched Dripaku when he had entered. My lord, we are outnumbered heavily by the Chandravanshis, continued Dripaku. We need every trained warrior we have. There are at least 5,000 soldiers who can't battle since they have been declared Vikrama. I can bring them together. We are willing and eager to die for our country. I don't want you to die for Meluha, brave Dripaku, said Shiva. Dripaku's face fell instantly. He thought he would be returning home to Kotdwar. However, continued Shiva, I would like it if you killed for Meluha. Dripaku looked up. Raised your brigade, Dripaku, ordered Shiva. Turning towards Daksha, he continued, we will call it the Vikrama Brigade. How can we have Vikramas in our army? This is ridiculous, glared Vidyunmali. Vidyunmali and Maya Shrenik were in their private gym preparing for their regular SWAT training. Vidyu co-hold Maya Shrenik. Don't Vidyu me, Maya. You know this is wrong. The usually calm Maya Shreni just nodded and let him impetuous friend vent his frustration. How will I face my ancestors if I die in this battle? Asked Vidyunmale. What will I answer if they ask me how I let a non-Kshatriya fight a battle that only we Kshatriyas should have fought? It is our duty to protect the weak. We are not supposed to use the weak to fight for us. Vidyu, I don't think Dripaku is weak. Have you forgotten his valor in the previous Chandravanshi war? He is a Vikrama. That makes him weak. Lord Shiva has decreed that there are no Vikramas anymore. I don't think the Nilkant truly knows right from wrong. Vidyu, shouted Maya Shrenik. Vidyunmali was surprised by the outburst. If the Nilkant says it is right, continued Maya Shrenik, then it is right.